Al-Jafari says the Human Rights Council is misled by testimonies of armed opposition members. The Syrians express appreciation for stances taken by Russia and China in support of the Syrian people. On the 30th anniversary of their uprising, the people of Golan assert their adherence to their Syrian Arab identity. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our news for today. Syria's envoy to the UN, Mr. Bashar al-Jafari, said that the Syrian delegation objected to the session of the UN General Assembly to discuss the report of the Human Rights Commissioner about the situation in Syria. He called for cancelling this session because of an essential defect in the mechanisms of the call and a legal defect that violates the procedures ruling the work of the General Assembly.
Syria's delegation to the UN objected to the convention of the UN session yesterday at the General Assembly to discuss the Human Rights Commissioner's report on the situation of human rights in Syria and called for cancelling this session due to the presence of an essential flaw in the mechanism of the invitation to this meeting, as well as a legal flaw that violated the measures regulating the work of the General Assembly. Syria's permanent representative to the UN, Dr. Bashar al-Jafari, said in organizing for this meeting to discuss the formation report, the chairman of the UN General Assembly proceeded from a political background completely far away from the common practice and relevant General Assembly resolutions. Dr. Jafari affirmed that procedural rules should not be manipulated to realize political gains. He called on the chairman of the General Assembly to be fair and objective and not to leave history to register that under his chairmanship the Assembly violated procedural rules and the principles of invitation for important General Assembly meetings, which would undermine the credibility of the Assembly and the United Nations. Dr. Jafari clarified that the message addressed by the chairman of the General Assembly to the member states to take part in this meeting at the end of last week stipulated that the Assembly's chairman called for the meeting on the basis of the developments that took place in Syria more than 2 months ago. Consequently, it is obvious that the invitation for the meeting at the UN General Assembly to discuss the report included in the document A/66/53 constituted a flagrant violation of the General Assembly resolution number 65/281, Dr. al-Jafari pointed out. He added that the referred to report was the result of the 18th extraordinary cycle of the Human Rights Council held on December 2nd, 2011, that is outside the period he had mentioned. Consequently, and from the legal point of view and according to the procedural measures of the General Assembly work, this report should be considered during the forthcoming session of the UN General Assembly, that is the 67th session, not the current 66th session. Al-Jafari affirmed that the Human Rights Council based its argument on misleading reports and testimonies by armed opposition members. He warned that Syria is being exposed to a war launched by Arab regional and international sides to undermine the state, not to support reform.
Syria has rejected the resolutions of the ministerial meeting of the Arab League Council concerning the situation in Syria. An official source asserted that such resolutions are considered a flagrant intervention in Syria's internal affairs, infringing on Syria's national sovereignty. They also violate the Arab League's charter. The resolution also contained fabrications that have nothing to do with the reality of the situation on the ground. The resolution, the source added, exposed the conspiracies against Syria and the attempts to invite foreign intervention in Syria's internal affairs. The source pointed out that the Arab League ended the mission of Arab observers simply because they exposed the terrorist crimes of the armed gangs supported by such countries. Syria expected the Secretary General of the Arab League to condemn the terrorist crimes which claimed the lives of hundreds of martyrs, both military and civilian. Syria also expected those Arab countries to stop media instigation to end all kinds of support for these terrorists. The Syrian source asserted that such resolutions would never prevent the Syrian government from continuing its responsibility to protect its citizens and to consolidate security and stability. Russia's representative to the UN, Vitaly Churkin, has expressed regret over the Arab League's decision to stop the work of the Arab Monitors mission in Syria. In his word at the UN General Assembly, Churkin said Vice President Farouk Shara had affirmed that he has all the jurisdictions to maintain dialogue with the opposition. He added that all opposition movements must get rid of the pressures exerted on them and join such dialogue on Moscow without preconditions. He pointed out that this can be accomplished according to a new constitution in Syria and with preparations for general elections based on a multi-party system. Churkin said the Arab League's initiative to deploy joint peacekeeping forces in Syria from the UN and Arab League needs a deep study. Chinese State Councilor Dai Dinggu said the Syrian issue, in its essence, is a Syrian internal affair, affirming that China's stance regarding Syria is objective and honest, as it agrees with the objects and principles of the UN Charter and the main criteria ruling the international relations. He pointed out that China supports the efforts exerted by the Arab countries to resolve the Syrian crisis through political settlements. The Chinese official affirmed that China will cooperate with the international community through playing a constructive role and resolving this crisis in a correct way. Cuba has condemned the misleading campaigns and media war launched against Syria, which aim at justifying the foreign interference in its internal affairs. Cuba's permanent representative to the UN, Pedro Nunes Mosquera, denounced the role played by the US, the West, and some Arab countries through interfering in Syria's internal affairs instead of contributing to finding a peaceful solution through holding dialogue and negotiations among all the Syrian sides. Mosquera also criticized the UN Security Council double standards in dealing with international issues and its silence regarding issuing any resolution towards the Israeli crimes against the Palestinian people. The World Peace Council has affirmed that the Arab League resolutions on Syria constitute a flagrant intervention in its internal affairs, expressing solidarity with Syria and rejection of any foreign criminal attack against it. In a statement issued in the Greek capital Athens, the Council warned that the USA and the European Union are using their collaborators in the region and the Gulf to get decisions issued by the Arab League in cooperation with the Turkish government, which embraces the so-called opposition, in order to bring the matter to the UN, which would facilitate a military action against Syria. Competent authorities raided a hideout used by armed terrorist groups in Harasta area at Damascus countryside and confiscated quantities of explosive charges and raw materials for preparing explosives. They also confiscated 3 Kalashnikov rifles and a number of military suits. In appreciation for the Chinese honorable stances towards the Syrian people, Damascus volunteering team organized an activity in front of the Chinese embassy in Damascus and expressed gratitude for the Chinese people and government and their support of Syria. The activity included signing on the Chinese flag during a ceremony at the Governorate Club. Thousands of people gathered in Latakia to express their appreciation for the stances taken by Russia and China in support of the Syrian people. The citizens expressed their support for the comprehensive reform program and their full rejection of any form of foreign interference in Syria's internal affairs. They also asserted their rejection of the Arab League's resolutions, which constitute a violation of Syria's sovereignty. They also expressed outrage at some Arab countries which rushed to ask for foreign interference in Syria, wondering why the Arab League was unable to take these steps concerning the daily violations of the Israeli occupation against the Palestinian people. Vice President Dr. Najah Al-Attar has affirmed during her meeting with a delegation of Russian intellectuals and academics yesterday that certain states are trying to recover their old colonialist history and consecrate their hegemony on the Middle East through new methods. She added that what is happening in Syria is part of the plot, and it will not be confined to it if it succeeds, but will extend to the region as a whole. Dr. Attar said it is regrettable that certain regional and Arab forces are involved in this plot against Syria and embark on executing American schemes which ultimately intend to encircle Russia and restrict its growing role on the international arena. Information Minister Dr. Adnan Mahmoud affirmed during his meeting with the delegation that Russia's support of Syria and its recent stand at the UN Security Council, as well as that of China, lays down the foundation for a new world order based on balance and justice, in which Russia's role is consecrated in preserving the principles of international law and respect for national sovereignty and Russia's keenness on international security and stability. Finally, the People's Commission for Liberating the Occupied Syrian Golan is currently facing fierce attack that targets the people, their land and civilization. The Commission renewed its rejection of all forms of extremism, terrorism and killings practiced by the armed terrorist groups in Syria. In a statement issued today marking the 30th anniversary of the uprising of the people in occupied Golan against the Israeli attempts to impose the Israeli identity, the Commission asserted adherence to Syrian Arab identity. The statement asserted that Israeli occupation will end sooner than later due to the steadfastness of the people of Golan. With this, we end our news bulletin for today. For more news about Syria and the region, you can visit our website in English, syriaonline.sy. After a short break, the latest business and market news with Yirado Krekorian.